MTO's initial policy was do not mix local with long distance traffic. And when they originally designed this corridor, they didn't expect any local traffic of substance. The developers found out about the highway and bought all the property up, and now they have created huge demand, which is really local traffic. So all we're saying is, as MTO said back in 1993 even, solve local traffic problems with local solutions. Do not use long distance solutions, because if you do, you're going to create huge congestion with both local and long distance traffic trying to get through on the same road. So the simple message we're providing today is, because of development and the growth that's now planned, this is not the place to put a long distance highway. This is the place to put really good arterial roads that will allow the people that live here that want to get to the highways to drive, the 8 or 10 kilometers they have to get there, because no one that's going to use these, if they do want long distance travel, is going to travel 16 kilometers. They live either in Queensville and they go to 404, or they go across over to 400, or they live in Bradford. But none of them are going to travel 16 kilometers. So we don't need a 16-kilometer, $4 billion highway to move those people to the two highways that they're trying to get to. What we do need are solutions now. And the reason we don't have those solutions now is because our local and regional politicians looked at the Places to Grow Act and said, why should we have to raise taxes to pay for this? The government's going to do that for us. We'll sit back and do nothing. And the thing that made it even more difficult is we had to have two different regions talk to each other. It wasn't within the control of one region. And at this stage, what really should happen, because we're all broke, is the government that's going to spend $4 billion should come up here and they should fix those two roads for us for a cost that is probably 10% of what this is going to be. And then they should go and start again and look somewhere where there is no development and say, that's where we're going to put this road. If we need the road, that's where it goes. And our solution says, before you spend money doing that, at least see if you can't do it with the 407. Thanks. My challenge today is to cover over 40 years of history in 12 minutes. That's why the notes. Basically, we've got some fundamental needs, traffic needs here, and we've had them since 1954, when Hurricane Hazel took out the bridge by Ravenshoe Road up at the south end, should I say, of Cooks Bay. Out of the way travel means trips from one side of Lake Simcoe to the other, requiring travel via Bradford. This adds 15 kilometers to the previous direct Ravenshoe Road route. Out of the way travel is the reason for the vast majority of traffic you see on Regional Road 4, otherwise Highway 11 today. MTO finally got around to doing something about that bridge. In 1979, a full EA study was conducted from 79 to 81 when EA approval was granted, subject to further information concerning crossing the Holland River. Other than that, everything was in place and land acquisition was approved. In approving the project, the EA Approval Board, which is a separate tribunal, ruled this was the only corridor that would solve the out-of-the-way travel problem. The red line shows the approved route for the Highway 89 extension. In 1984, just before MTO was to present the detailed information concerning the Holland River crossing to the board, the Minister of Transportation canceled the project and had the EA approval rescinded. He also committed to avoid the marsh for any future project. He did this in response to lobbying by Sierra Club and Ducks Unlimited. So after that, following abandonment of the 89 plan, local municipalities lobbied MTO to complete the Highway 89 extension. However, that was without success. Subsequently, in 1989, MTO conducted an overview study to look at the whole area and identify the best solutions for this area. Thereafter, in 1993, MTO's Bradford Bypass study was commenced, and incidentally, it ignored the recommendations of both the EA tribunal and the overview study consultants with respect to the location they chose for their study area. Once it is approved by the minister, the environmental assessment study proposal is the legal terms of reference for the EA study and the ultimate project. So basically, the proposal, which starts the whole thing, when approved, becomes the absolute ground rules for this entire project. Unlike normal EA studies, this study focused on identifying and protecting a corridor for a future controlled access highway for which there was insufficient current need. So they said, we know we don't need it now, but we're going to need it sometime, so we're going to protect the corridor now. Thus, the EA proposal authorized MTO to consider only reasonable alternative roadways that could be upgraded to a controlled access highway. And that's important to understand. They were really only looking for a place where they could put a corridor for a controlled access highway and nothing else. The final report acknowledged the lack of need, but recommended constructing a 2-lane highway solely to protect the corridor. Government rejected this recommendation and instead filed land registration restrictions on all lands within the study corridor and included the Bradford Bypass as a future highway in the Places to Grow Act. And this is where things get interesting, because this latter step attracted land speculators, we now call them developers, whose actions created local rather than long-distance travel demands from their sprawling residential developments along and near the major portions of the corridor. This table is from the original environmental assessment study that was approved in 2002. Contrary to this chart, Highway 89 Ravenshoe Road corridor was not considered due to the minister's promise to never again impact the marsh. So what they're showing there is not correct. The EA study report states that the Highway 89 route is less environmentally intrusive because it was a 2-lane rather than 4-lane road. We say it's less environmentally intrusive because it only crosses the Holland River once and avoids virtually all wetlands. We don't know what the issues were with the outer ring roads. These are the ones south of Newmarket. MTO did not publish these studies and is now unable to locate copies of the studies in response to an FOI request. But they say it's not as good as Bradford Bypass. This is how they evaluated the various options. The table depicts the weightings the consultants gave to each listed attribute for each evaluated corridor. The corridor in red on the left on each table are the outer ring road corridors. South of Newmarket, the ones on the right are the Bradford Bypass, and large dots are best. The Newmarket Aurora corridor scores close to the Bradford Bypass corridor, and it's likely superior now that the consultants have learned more about the topography to be covered by the Bradford Bypass. Now, this slide is critical information. The stuff highlighted, the 2 bullets, are absolutely critical to how all this thing works. MTO's policy is to not mix local traffic with long-distance traffic. Ford and Mulrooney are using planned local growth to justify the need for this highway. That's not within MTO's mandate, according to the original EAS. The 1997 EAS is deficient because it did not consider the GO train and regional solutions as reasonable alternatives. Conditions, however, of the 2000 EA approval require a class environmental assessment before construction starts to obtain final EA approval. A Class EA study would update the 1997 EA study to address today's circumstances, including consideration of the impact of the GO train, increased work from home activity, and local alternative road solutions. These charts are from the first virtual public information center. The red rectangles show highways 400 and 404. The blue box is the before and after state of the major traffic roads in Bradford. Those weren't on the slides provided by the consultants. I've added those boxes so you can see them and see the impact. Essentially, though, what this is telling us is that the addition of an 8-lane Bradford bypass through Bradford exchanges one bad route, that's in red, Bridge Street, for two poor routes, all at the cost of about $4 billion. This travel demand information is not within MTO's EA-approved long-distance travel mandate. Here, MTO is focusing on local traffic, which is a local regional responsibility, according to the law and the approval of the EA study in the first place, which is what we're all relying on. MTO needs to provide information on long-distance travel time savings, such as from Barrie or Innisfil to Oshawa and Keswick to Mississauga. The 35-minute savings promised by Ford and Mulroney for this highway would be very meaningful for long-distance travelers. It is nowhere as important for people who only want to drive through Bradford, especially once local solutions such as those we are recommending are implemented. All the dramatic planned local growth in this area, we require local solutions. Long-distance solutions should be reachable using local solutions, but not co-located with local solutions. The following two slides show reasonable alternative local solutions warranting serious consideration. Ravenshoe Road is the green line on the right side of the satellite picture. The vertical green line would be a new roadway, including a bridge over the Holland River. The green line on the left is Simcoe County Line 13. Now, this is important. Even if the Bradford Bypass is built, there's a compelling need for a regional road in this area. If the Bradford Bypass is not built, this is an excellent local solution. This route would connect Bradford's 8th line to Hawkrider Road, then Bathurst Street, and ultimately Queensville Side Road. The bridge over the West Holland River is essentially where the Bradford Bypass Bridge is currently planned. The red lines are is where new construction is needed, whereas the green lines show existing roads. The bottom green lines are the existing route through Bradford from both the south and the east. This route provides two distinct parallel east-west roads through Bradford. It eliminates the combination of Queensville Side Road traffic and Highway 11 traffic on Bridge Street through the center of Bradford. This would be more than enough capacity for local traffic, especially if northern out-of-the-way travel is handled by a Ravenshoe Road corridor, as shown in the previous slide. All environmental assessments have one fundamental requirement. You must prove need and justification of the project. In October 2021, the Ontario government passed Ontario Regulation 697/21. We call that the exemption regulation. This regulation granted final approval to the Bradford Bypass based on the Minister of Environment's 2002 approval of MTO's December 1997 EA study report. The exemption regulation eliminated the requirement to conduct a class environmental assessment study. At the time, one was underway. While the requirement to consider local roads as reasonable alternatives was specifically excluded for the 1997 environmental assessment study, it was specifically included and required as a term of approval of that EAS due to the requirement to conduct a Class EA. This was to ensure that the highway properly satisfied the EA Act's need and justification requirements at the time it was to be built. This exemption regulation forecloses any ability to reconsider the location of the Bradford Bypass to take into consideration all legislative, land use, travel demand, and natural changes that have occurred since publication of the 1997 EA study. This is unprecedented bad public policy. Given the changes in forecasted demand for the highway caused by planned 15-minute all-day GO train service to Bradford, increasing work at home employment, Toronto now has currently 38% of its workforce working from home, ever-increasing cost of insurance and gas for cars or high cost of replacement for electric vehicles, and the growing intensity of compact community planning initiatives, notwithstanding Ford's focus on further unaffordable sprawl. Because of all these reasons, we are of the view that a totally independent, unbiased study is warranted to ensure that the correct solutions, rather than these 30-year-old solutions, are identified and implemented. That's why we joined with other associations to request a federal impact assessment and sought a judicial review of the minister's denial of our request. We've lived with 3 out of 4 of these traffic problems for over 65 years. Items on top of the red line are provincial mandate, whereas items below the red line are local or regional mandate. Newmarket's problems were solved using local, regional, rather than provincial solutions, and they're in place and have been for some time now. Meanwhile, the Bradford Bypass' current estimated completion date is 2033 or later. Can we wait that long? By way of recap, this is a listing of all the steps that happened. This slide shows how we've spent the last 30 years. We are a further 10 years away from the expected opening of this highway. By the time this highway is operational, we will have endured over 50 years of traffic problems since initiation of the abandoned Highway 89 extension project. We encourage the province to take whatever steps it deems appropriate to use Highway 407 as a reasonable alternative to address any residual long-distance traffic demand that still exists once our proposed local solutions have been implemented. Absent federal government intervention or a change in the Ontario government prior to their awarding a construction contract, this highway is now essentially a done deal. The final requirement set out in the exemption regulation is to publish a project impact assessment report. A draft report was published on the Bradford Bypass project website on June 1 and will be available until June 30th. It's only 500 and some odd pages long. Once the final report is published, MTO have satisfied the requirements of this regulation and can proceed to letting the contracts. Thank you. I'll be pleased to answer any questions you may have at the conclusion of this scheduled presentation.